Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Abinaya Rajavelu, or short for Abby. I'm one of the directors at Cred Consulting in Sydney. I'm joining you from Gadigal country today, and I would like to extend my respect to our First Nations elders, past and present, and warmly welcome any First Peoples attendees who are joining us today. Today's Creducation webinar is part of our free webinar series that Cred offers, where we join our colleagues and friends to share our knowledge, expertise, and learnings. If some of you were in our last webinar, we spoke about some innovative solutions from around the world and discussed practical pathways to providing more public open spaces and how to unlock funding to bring these ideas to life. But today, we're going to talk about how to maximize the land or public spaces we already have and provide more and better recreational offerings in them to meet evolving community needs. But not just that, how do you co-design these solutions with your community, and how do you test and implement them together? There's two of us at the panel today. I've already introduced myself. In the first part of today's webinar, I'll provide a brief overview of the public spaces and recreation strategy and the placemaking planning toolkit we developed with Willoughby City Council. We're also joined by Stephen Alderton from Willoughby City Council, who has generously offered his time to share his learnings and findings from the past 2 years of implementing the strategy and piloting various projects very successfully across the city. Stephen, could I get yourself to introduce yourself to the attendees, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name's Stephen Alderton. I'm Willoughby Council's Public Space and Leisure Manager. I'm in charge of all the council's open space, from strategic planning, project delivery, maintenance through to operations. So all aspects of open space sits under my remit. Been with Willoughby Council just over 2 years. I'm really excited to share, I suppose, our journey over the last 18 months, 2 years, with work with our public space mix strategy with you today.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks for joining us. Before we get stuck in, just a couple of boring housekeeping to take you all through today. The session will be recorded and will be made available on Cred Consulting's website. We will send you an email or a link after with the video as well, so you can watch this later on. In your Zoom screen, in the bottom, there's a Q&A box. If I can strongly encourage people to submit your Q&A questions through this box. And at the end of the session, you'll have the opportunity to ask both myself and Stephen all of your questions that we'll address in the end. There's also a chat button, which is a public forum that you can use to chat across participants, ask any questions, but I'd strongly encourage you to use the Q&A because that's what we'll be using to moderate which questions to pick and which we can answer during the session in the end. So that's pretty much it for housekeeping. So let's get stuck in and talk about the public spaces and recreational strategy. Looking at our list of attendees, because we know we have a national audience today, let me take you through where Willoughby City is located. If you could go to the next slide, Phoebes. Thank you. And if you can see in this map, the area highlighted in that black outline is Willoughby City. Phoebes, if you could run your screen pointer over where the Sydney Harbour, the CBD is. Now, a little bit down where the Sydney Opera House would be. Yeah, thank you. So that's where, for context, that's where the Opera House, the harbour is located for your reference. So just north of that is North Sydney LGA, and right on top of that is Willoughby City. So that's really, really close to the CBD itself and is very much an inner Sydney local government area. So this hopefully gives you a bit of context in terms of where it's located and its proximity to other neighboring areas. Next slide, please. Thank you. And when Cred started working with Council on this strategy, the challenges that Council was seeking to address is that in the previous 2013 studies and strategies, they were highly structured and relied on planning mechanisms like master plans to deliver more and better recreational infrastructure. That said, in the 10 years between 2013 and 2023, Council has already implemented most of the district and regional master plans and infrastructure that were identified, so kudos to Council. But what this process also highlighted for them is master plans often take a very long time, sometimes as long as 5 to 10 years to materialize. So there was a need for a more quicker and a more agile approach to delivering recreational infrastructure within the city. At the same time, council were reaching peak open space, and that means opportunities to acquire substantial new land for new open spaces was becoming more and more challenging. And this is because land was limited, it was constrained, and incredibly expensive, something I'm sure those of you who are joining us from local government or state government can relate to. The population within Willoughby City is also growing more significantly in some areas, and the makeup of the community is also evolving, with more people from culturally diverse backgrounds making Willoughby City home. And this also means changing recreational preferences. And this means there's a need to provide more new things which weren't historically planned for. So, in a nutshell, this means a new way forward was needed for Willoughby City, and that's what underpinned the outcomes of this strategy. Anything you'd like to add to this, Stephen?
No, I think you've covered it really well. I think, certainly one of the other, I suppose, aspects we do have with our community is we've got quite a diverse city in itself. We have a CBD location in Chatswood, which is probably facilitating most of that, residential population. So it's located on the new metro line. It's one of the top 2 or 3 use stations. My economic development team give you the exact stats. So we have a lot of passengers coming through, a lot of workers who are coming in and travelling into the city each day, who add to that sort of variety of recreation needs. So it's quite an interesting population in and around Chatswood CBD and certainly along that metro rail corridor. But we also have a real, let's say, low density residential, sort of high income areas of our LGA on the sort of peninsulas that head out into Middle Harbour. So areas around like Northbridge, Castle Crag, it's very much a low density, high socioeconomic, I suppose, traditional large houses on the harbour sort of vibe. So it's very much a diversity, and the recreation needs of both our CBD and sort of those communities can differ quite dramatically, even though the distance between those areas might only be a couple of kilometres.
Thank you, Stephen. Next slide, please, Phoebe. And Cred, in developing this strategy, considering all of these competing uses and needs, underpinned by a very rigorous methodology, it considered a range of indicators, all the way from strategic drivers to the current and future population of the area, looking at what open spaces exist now, where they are, how they're being used, what functions do they offer, can people in the community easily access and get to them, engaging with community and stakeholders, and also undertaking an evaluation of 15 select public spaces. And I thought today might be a good opportunity to share some interesting findings from this analysis with you. In the next slide, you'll see some population maps on the left side. And these have been directly sourced from Social Atlas, so anybody can do this for your LGA or the area that you're doing an assessment for. And what this map or these maps show you is there's, to Stephen's point, the diversity is very much prominent across the LGA. So for example, people who are born in China or Hong Kong, more people live near Chatswood and the area surrounding it. More people born in India were located near Artarmon and lived in areas around there. More people who were born in Korea lived on the other side of Chatswood. And to Stephen's point, people from, more Irish, Scottish, or British, or largely English-speaking backgrounds were more towards the harbor and the waterways. So you can also see in these maps, along the train line, wherever in the bottom half of the map, where it's really dark, is where the high density areas are now, and the other parts of the LGA are lower density. And the areas that are high density now are the areas that are likely to grow in density into the future. So taking all of these things into account, working out what the recreational preferences and needs for these different areas were became a sort of key contributor to the strategy. And when I said our team evaluated 15 public spaces, what that meant is going to 15 spaces physically that covered a range, all the way from laneways to linkage paths, plazas to sports ground, outdoor courts, from small parks to large parks, and observing these sites, both across the day and across the week to see who uses them, what times do they use them, how do they use them, and what's sort of working in these spaces, what's not working, what are their strengths, their challenges, and opportunities to sort of see what the way forward or what's possible in these types of spaces in the future. And this gave us a sort of really clear baseline among all the other indicators I spoke to you about earlier in terms of what's possible in Willoughby City, which formed part of our analysis. The other really key contributor to the strategy is engagement with community and stakeholders. We designed an engagement strategy that captured voices and ideas all across the community, even the hard to reach cohorts. And what the community wanted to see was sort of really clear. And they wanted to be a part of the planning and designing public spaces. And they wanted the permission to make these spaces their own even after they're delivered. So having less control over what happens in these spaces and giving community the freedom to make it their own. And community were also acknowledging the fact that it is hard to get more spaces and acquire large pieces of land. So they want to be more innovative in how existing spaces are already used and having better diversity across ages, abilities, genders, and cultural backgrounds in how these spaces are used. So basically something for everyone to do. And also rethinking spaces that aren't traditionally used for recreation as actually usable public spaces for recreation. And in the next slide, you'll see in workshops, we even used AI to generate and live test some ideas with the community. This was just something for fun that we did. But it really sort of teased out what's possible and where our community wanted the future to head. If you can switch to the next slide, Phoebes, we can quickly show them this. So none of this obviously is real or possible. It's just, having a fun way to test ideas with the community, but they really wanted to see spaces like streets being reimagined as recreation spaces. But of course, all of this is underpinned by, is it feasible? Can traffic be rerouted? But still, these are spaces that can be used for recreation in a usable, meaningful way. So there was a big shift in terms of the diversity and functions and uses they wanted to see. So on the left side is probably now or historically, the community said and felt that in Willoughby, there were more spaces for sport and exercise, but lesser spaces for other things they wanted to do, such as play and create, learn and connect with each other, socialize and celebrate with family and friends, and especially celebrate the diverse cultures that call Willoughby home. And also, more importantly, because some areas of the city were really busy, they wanted spaces even within these areas to relax and reflect. And the graphic on the right is what they want the future to sort of transition to. Not saying that they wanted lesser space for sport and exercise, but they want the other functions and spaces to grow in importance. So everybody in the community has an equal opportunity and chance to do what they want to do. So considering all of these indicators holistically, this distilled into 5 priorities. Next slide, please. I won't go through the detail of all of this. Council's strategy is available on Council's website. So I'll just sort of quickly, give you a sentence or two about this. So the 5 priorities were, creating a network of public spaces with an actually activated and usable recreational link network. The second one was unlocking unused spaces for recreation, activating existing spaces with diversity of uses and also together with the community, encouraging shared uses and making existing spaces multi-purpose and flexible. And the 5th one is the more, for the more complex or bigger infrastructure, the need for collaborative and coordinated delivery across the region. But at the heart of all of this is, yes, the community told us this, and these are our 5 priorities. But in terms of wanting the need for a new approach is, how is the strategy going to be implemented? And there were sort of 3 clear directions that came out of this. The community needed to be at the heart of it. Sorry, next slide, please. Thank you. The community at the heart of designing and planning for public spaces that fit their needs and that fit their evolving needs. And this process needed to be quick, flexible, and adaptable, so you don't have to wait for 5 to 10 years to see things come to life. And also to test, validate, and iterate these ideas to make sure that what we deliver actually works for the community. So in implementing any strategy, you need a clear planning pathway. So the next question for us was, how do we develop a planning pathway that enables community design, co-design, but also a lighter, quicker, and cheaper delivery mechanism? And this is where the Placemaking Recreation Planning Toolkit came into play. So this was something that was always part of the brief when council reached out to us, but we were always unsure how this would piece together. And we had a lot of back and forth with council in terms of what would be usable so that council can actually pick this framework or mechanism and use it as a way to deliver projects. Next slide, please. And one of the key things that we collaborated with council on is annually, there will be an allocation of an annual budget for generic placemaking recreation projects within council's budget. And each year, council would choose either one site or many sites where there's emerging need, demand, or through the strategy, we'd identified a range of priority areas that needed to be addressed. So they can pick whichever one is more important for that year. And then using these sites, how do you co-design solutions with the community? How do you implement them? And how do you test them? And after a job is successful or the community feels like this is needed for our community, that would make its way into long-term capital funding for that year. So what this kit offered is very flexible tools. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the kit offers a range of sort of really flexible and adaptable frameworks on how do you choose a site, what are some criteria you can use for that, and what are the steps in connecting with your community, and how do you co-design with your community? And based on the budget allocated or how much money is on the table, how do you choose which scale of interventions needed, and what are the steps in testing if an intervention is successful, and how do you iterate and measure or demonstrate that this is a success? And this toolkit was designed, much with its ethos of the process itself, to be really flexible, to give council the ability to really embrace this. And council has done just that. Over the past 2 years, they've really made this their own. They've tested this a few different ways and landed in an approach that sort of works for them. And Stephen will talk to this in a second. But this is still sort of iterating and becoming a living, breathing document for council and in the ways that they can use to pilot projects. So hopefully this gives you a bit of background on what the strategy is, what challenges we were seeking to address, and what its priorities are, and what's the planning mechanism to actually bring it to life. But I will throw to Stephen to talk to you about lessons from Willoughby City Council from the past 2 years and how they've done all the wonderful things they've done.
Perfect. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Abby. Look, I think probably the key thing that Abby's already touched on. Previously, council had a 2013 open space and rec plan, which was guiding all of our strategic approach to our parks and reserves and really all of our public space across the city. And it was really traditional in its approach. It was highly structured. It really gave us sort of almost a very clear pathway of go to this park, do a master plan, spend 15 years delivering infrastructure. That's it. And I think what we found, particularly with, I suppose, the last few years especially, our parks, generally speaking, were pretty full. We delivered pretty much every master plan that we had. A lot of the, I suppose, the assets and the green space in a park had been filled with, with a basketball court, a loop path, a playground, whatever that may have been that had been identified in the master plan, 10 or 15 years prior. And what we were finding is when we came to a park to deliver a project, it may have been something that had been identified by a community 15, 16, 17 years prior, which may no longer meet the needs of that community. It may be that what was previously a low residential area across the road that might have used this space in the park, for a kickabout space, all of a sudden there might be a high-rise building across the road now. So really we had to make sure And part of what I suppose led to our decision to shift this focus was that need to try and identify something that was more responsive to our community needs. And really wanted to try and take an approach that was a lot more collaborative with our community. One of the key things that our councillors had really identified over the past, sort of 2 terms of council had been a need for us to be far more engaging with our community. We're generally quite a high SES, highly educated community. They're very good at going through and spending the time to look up council's operational plan, our delivery program, reviewing our strategic documents and pulling us up on, what we identify was, is there a way that we can, I suppose, approach our planning in a way that we're being a bit more flexible and more responsive to our community, and also potentially not committing ourselves too far financially as well. Certainly, rising costs lately have put a strain on some of those major projects that us and many other councils are having to deliver. So if we can have a way that's sort of lighter, quicker, cheaper to deliver, more responsive, and able to really, I suppose, meet the needs of the community, then that's sort of was the goal and what led to the strategy that we worked with in partnership with Cred to develop a couple of years ago. As Abby's identified, that sort of planning pathway and that approach, how we're, I suppose, implementing the strategy is still something that's really a work in progress still. What we're finding, we've done 2 parks that we've sort of completed this process at, 2 that we've got in progress, one right at the early stages of that planning pathway, one sort of halfway through. And what we've found is we've had really quite a different experience at each site. The 4 sites we've chosen to do, this initial 4 sites, are all quite different. All quite different parks, and I'll talk through some detail on those examples in a moment. But what we're finding is need to also be flexible. Even though we've got a framework and we're adjusting as we go, every time we have a new site and we're having sort of new interests from our community and new levels of engagement, we're finding a need to refine it. So it's almost, we're going to have I don't think we're going to settle on an exact, clear planning pathway. It is always going to be a framework, and we're going to have to adjust it each time as we approach our community with what we're doing. And probably the other challenge, which I suppose I've really found over the last 2 years implementing this, has been the need for change management internally. Very much, obviously, a lot of our, let's say, our traditional corporate side of our business in terms of our asset management team, our long-term financial plan through our finance team. Some of the mechanisms we have there for how we do planning, they sort of necessitate or ask us to be very structured in how we approach a lot of our planning, and trying to, I suppose, take them on the journey with us and sort of educate them about how we're approaching things, how we are doing a lot of our planning, has been a bit of a journey. I think it's something that we've been able to sort of get buy-in. Luckily, my executive team's been really supportive of that implementation, but we'll be able to get some buy-in there as well, and sort of creating some more, I suppose, flexibility in how we list things and identify things in some of those sort of longer term plans. It's been really, really important for us to, I suppose, help get buy-in internally as well as from our community as we're out there trying to sort of implement the strategy. Next slide, please, Phoebe. So really, in terms of what our approach is, what we did, we took the planning approach that was identified through that strategy, and we've just been just moulding it and changing it as we've gone through delivery. The first step, and what we found is really important, is to go out and just do a broad community engagement exercise. And really, essentially, we'll identify whatever the park may be or the public space may be. We'll go out, we'll identify who the surrounding residents are, who the stakeholders are, who are the community that use this space, and undertake just like a real broad scale community engagement exercise where we're asking them real basic questions like, what do you like about this space? What type of experiences do you have in this space? Do you come here to conduct sport and exercise? Do you come to this park for a quiet enjoyment time? Do you come here for events? What do you come to this space for? What do you use this space for? What's the current status of this park? How are you currently using this park? And then broad questions around what do you do in the future? What do you want from this park? Do you want it to lean more heavily into those sport and exercise elements? Do you want basketball? Do you want fitness stations? Do you want that kind of experience, or do you want a more quiet experience? Do you want to be able to come here and sit under the trees, hear the birds, read a book, whatever it may be? So we try and really do that on a really broad scale, engaging as many people as we can. Using our engagement approach, whether that be signage, direct stakeholder emails, letterbox drops, whatever it may be, to try and intercept surveys, whatever it may be, to try and reach those people, which we adjust based on the site. We try and undertake as broad an engagement process as possible to really try and feed in and give us some high level information around what our community wants. At the same time, while we're running, I suppose, that initial engagement process, we also run an expression of interest process, where we encourage members of our community to sign up to participate in a workshop. So if they are interested, if they are passionate about the space, we ask them to sort of leave their details, to come along and we'll identify a workshop session in future, and ask them if they'd like to participate to leave their details, so we can reach out to them and really try and develop a bit of a, I suppose, almost like a little sort of a park care advisory group that we're going to engage with through the co-design process. So we run that EOI at the same time as that broad sort of engagement exercise, and really have that open for about 4 weeks, about 28 days, give or take, school holidays and the like, to try and really capture as many members of our community as we can, and capture as much of the sentiment of what our community wants that space to be and what kind of experience they want to have in that space. What we do as a next step is we actually collate all that feedback. We go through and really put it together into some simple formats, some simple tables around theming what, I suppose, the current use is and what the future desire is of that park. But we try not to analyse it too much. So we try to sort of capture what the results were and put it into a format that's as, I suppose, it's easy for our community to understand, or it's easy for the layman to read and understand, what the consensus is in terms of what type of experience people want to have in a park. We put that together, and then as we're doing that, we're then going through that EOI list and identifying, what we call our co-design workshop participants. And with that, we try and make sure we're getting as diverse a group as possible. So as we go through from the EOI, we might have 20, 30, 40 people who have said, yep, I'd love to participate. What we're doing is we're going through, we're analysing and trying to make sure we're being as broad as possible in terms of gender, in terms of age, in terms of affiliation to groups. Say, for example, we're at a sports ground, we make sure we're getting members from different elements of the sporting community. If it's cricket in summer, soccer in winter, we want to get people from the cricket club, people from the soccer club, and not just necessarily committee members. Of course, it's important to engage with the committee and what the committee's desires are, although generally we have a good idea. They're people we're in conversation with all the time. What we also try and do is try and find, if we can, perhaps like a parent or someone who's a participant and user of that space, but not necessarily directly involved with the club. So really trying to get a real broad range of ideas. Certainly people from like Council's Access Committee, Bush Care committees, trying to sort of bring them all together. We try and get a group of about 15 or so. It does depend on the park. Perhaps slightly more, slightly larger for a larger park, perhaps a little bit fewer for a smaller park. And bring them together. And what we do as that third step is we run a co-design workshop. So essentially it's a afternoon, evening session, depending on the timing that suits, I suppose, staff and community. Then we run a session at night where we go through it's quite an unstructured session, but we're sort of trying to refine that as we go through. Where what we do is we present the ideas that our community have, present that feedback that the community gave us to those residents. We ask them to go through that list, to review it, to analyse it. We're having discussions about that and trying to help, I suppose, educate and inform those, the workshop participants around what those desires are, and sort of have them help us analyse and identify what sort of the key themes are. And then probably the key question we ask them is, what type of activations or events would make you visit this park more often? What things are missing from this park that we can do that are potentially lighter, quicker, cheaper, whether that be sort of programming, whether that be temporary infrastructure. What are things that we can do to come here to try and really activate this space to make it more desirable for you to visit as a resident or as a member of a sports club or member of Bush Care, whatever it may be. With 30, 40, 50 plus ideas. And then we have those members of the community then, I suppose, evaluate those ideas. So we've got a matrix that we've developed, which we asked the community, the workshop participants to work through as they're sitting there in the workshop. They're going through, they're evaluating almost with the traffic light system, green, yellow, red, how they, I suppose, the alignment of that idea to the principles of our public space and rec strategy, as well as some other parameters that we put in place, things like budget, things like suitability, given either the surrounding residential properties or the bush or the surrounding site, surround the park. And we asked them to go through and evaluate those and really try and bring it down to a maximum of 3 ideas. With what we tend to set is a budget of about $15,000 or $20,000 for the implementation of those ideas. Now, we do say that, look, it can be one big idea, 2 smaller ideas. We don't set any parameters around that, but we really try and have them on the journey with us, helping to decide what activations we're going to trial or what program we're going to trial in this space, with a view of potentially, if it's successful, being something we can make permanent. We also take the opportunity to if we do have there's an asset renewal program identified with a little bit of flexibility, in that, what their priorities are in terms of upgrading some of that infrastructure. As I said, we asked the group to try and settle on those 3 ideas. They work through and I'll have some examples of what some of those ideas are in a moment. As I said, considering budget, neighbours, alignment strategy, and really trying as well to ask them to, evaluate who the target audience is. We really want to encourage them to, as they're thinking of these ideas, to have ideas which are going to be something that's reaching as many people as possible and as broad a community as possible. An example I have later is around athletics. What we wanted to encourage them is, look, don't just give us an idea that's going to help athletics and promote this site as an athletics site. What's something that may make people who are not traditionally involved in athletics come to this park and to use this space. So really trying to hit on that idea of needing to maximise the space for all types of recreation and all types of experiences. What we then do is we settle on those 3 ideas with our group, which to date, with all sessions we've run, we've been able to settle on 3, which is great. And we then, take that, feed that into our programming and planning for the next 12 months, with the idea that either we as council or ideally in partnership with an existing stakeholder or a community group will try and deliver these ideas over the following 6 to 12 months. And what we really try and do as well is to use our workshop group to help champion those ideas. So we keep them very much involved throughout the process. So as we're going through and planning one of the activations, the program, we're giving regular updates to those groups, whether it's just an email saying, hi, here's the planning. We're looking at installing the temporary infrastructure in a few weeks' time, and really try and get them to help us champion and promote it through their networks. So whether it is to their neighbour or to their sports club, or to try and really get that buy-in across the community, and help them feel involved in the process as well. We then deliver those activation ideas or the temporary infrastructure, whether that's something that's a one-off event, whether it's a program that we run for a series of 10, 12 weeks, or it's temporary infrastructure that we install for a couple of months. We run that, deliver that within the park or the public space, with the idea then being that we then seek feedback. So we run either surveys, if it's an event, we're obviously capturing participant data and so what the visitation is on the day, as well as we also go back to our workshop participants and ask them for feedback. If it's something that's a basic piece of infrastructure, sometimes you're going to have a survey, you're probably not going to get a very high response rate. So instead, we try and utilise our workshop group to help feed in, has this been a success? Have you seen it being used? Is it something that's worthwhile pursuing long term? And then, to close the loop at the end of that process, we then report back to that workshop group in terms of what the outcome, the results of the surveys are. Based off that, if it's something that's been successful, we'll advise them that we're going to feed it into our long-term financial planning, our operational plan, our delivery program, rough timelines that might be around that. And of course, that stage, it's advising our councillors and keeping them involved as well to make sure that they've got buy-in to the project as well. Next slide, please, Phoebe. Okay, so first example. So the very first site that we did for this project was at Muston Park. Muston Park is probably one of our largest or second largest passive park that we have in the city. It's located on a relatively major arterial road that travels through and on the route through to the city, connecting up to some of the, eventually connects up through North Sydney onto the Wingra Freeway. So it's quite a busy space in terms of commuters. There's bus routes going along there, so commuters travelling through the park of a morning, of an evening, but very much the setting around the park is low density residential, despite it being on one of those arterial roads. So the first project we had, we ran in March 2024, so a little over 12 months ago. As you can see here, session we actually ran this one as the first one in the park. It was a nice, full 37-degree day, so a bit warm, but ran it in the park with the community. We had about 15 members of the community come along and join us on the day, primarily for this park being a passive park with no real sort of sporting users or anything. Primarily our residents who lived adjacent to the park or in close proximity to the park. We had about 50 ideas that they generated throughout the day. With the three we ended up landing on being Tai Chi classes, exercise station, and an educational nature walk, which I think is quite a diverse sort of range of experiences, and really interesting to see that, to a degree, a Tai Chi class, quite quiet, but isn't something necessarily you think a resident might want happening sort of outside their back window. And probably the other thing that came from this co-design workshop was we had a real strong push from our community to reprioritise a major renewal project. So within Muston Park, one of the key features of Muston Park is a wisteria walk. So we've got this lovely wisteria that runs around sort of one side of the park, which council obviously maintains, but our community and the workshop participants, nearly to a T, all said the number one thing they wanted council to do, I suppose, for this park over the next few years was to upgrade that wisteria walk and to renew the arbour structure that supports it. They really, something that they really valued, something that made them really proud to live near this park, despite the extra traffic it generates for wedding photos and the like. It's one thing that really pushed us to do. So that really, it was good information to capture that we wouldn't have necessarily known if it wasn't for running this process. Next slide, please, Phoebe. So yeah, so the three ideas we ended up coming to: exercise station, fitness station, nature walk or educational signage, and the Tai Chi classes. So really, what we ended up with, the Tai Chi classes look real simple thing for us to implement. We went out, identified an instructor who came through and delivered a series of 10 classes that we ran, so it's free of charge. For this, we had about 30 to 35 people attending each class. Even on a rainy day, we ended up with about 20, 25 coming to the class, which is a great turnout. Series of 10 classes, which was absolutely wonderful to see. Visitors to the park who wouldn't necessarily go there, including people travelling from other LGAs to join us, which, look, not really something we should spend council money on, but that's okay. It really just showed that the need and desire for that amongst our community and the surrounds. The nature walk signage, so one of the key ideas was there's a little creekway that runs through Muston Park. What the residents wanted to see is they wanted somewhere they can go walk with particularly their grandkids, sort of show them some of the fauna that were native to the park. And it's a great opportunity to collaborate with our bushland team in a local school. There's a project council does each year. We ask school kids to, I suppose, do drawings of some native fauna, which we've been able to sort of capture that, use that on some of this signage. So along the walk and the pathways through the park, at various points we install sort of this signage, initially temporarily, with a suppose little moniker there to try and help, I suppose, create some level of interest for parents and kids alike. Install that through the park as a bit of a walkway. And then finally, exercise stations, which initially that was a bit of a challenge for us to how do we deliver an exercise station temporarily. Traditionally, soft fall, they're quite set pieces of infrastructure. What we ended up landing on was using sandstone blocks. So there's an existing concrete slab in the park, which had a picnic table on it. We relocated that picnic table out, placed some sandstone blocks there, and then with some signage which gave some directions on here are 4 or 5 different sort of exercises you can use for this space on different height sandstone blocks. We had that as a trial. We ran that for several weeks, and ultimately we ended up getting a really good response. And the response we had from that, from the surveys that were attached to it, about 90% of people saying, "Yep, we'd love this to be a permanent exercise station." And we're able to, in sort of how we structure that survey, tease out the types of exercise, the types of movement they wanted, whether it's static, dynamic, let's say more intense forms of exercise, or more, let's say, less intense body weight style exercises. So we're able to sort of draw out some information, all from having some sandstone blocks in the park, which we're able to deliver for just a couple of $1,000 to supply and lay those. Ultimately, the Tai Chi classes, really successful. The instructor who ran those classes is now going through and applying for some community grant funding to try and carry on delivering those classes on an ongoing basis at no cost to council. Well, via our grants program perhaps, but I suppose essentially at no ongoing cost for I suppose the open space team. The nature signage, 100% positive feedback. We've ended up installing those permanently, and the exercise station, based off the feedback we've got from those, we've now factored that in and have a project in our draft 25-26 operational plan to deliver that as a permanent feature of the park moving forward. Next slide, Phoebe. So the second site that we conducted later last year was OH Reed Reserve. Now, OH Reed Reserve, very, very different setting than Muston Park. So OH Reed Reserve is right on the edge of our LGA, right down in the Lane Cove River. It's a large sports ground space, no floodlighting. It's very much used dog off leash area. It's got 2 junior soccer fields in there, 1 senior cricket field, and a lot of native bush areas that come off that space. Similar session, we had about 15, or slightly under 15, about 12 come along to this session that we held. It's about June or July last year, with the 3 ideas that came from that session being for park seating, being for a basketball court, and for wayfinding signage to promote some of the bush tracks that come off the reserve. Next slide, Phoebe. So the first one, basketball court. So the basketball court was probably the biggest ticket item that came from that co-design workshop. And really, given the space constraints, what we actually looked at and identified was using a portion of the car park to create this basketball court. So a little bit more expensive to deliver. It's probably close to sort of the $10,000 mark for delivery and installation of the infrastructure you can see here. But essentially what we've done, we've installed a basketball hoop just in a corner of the car park, segregated it off with some sandstone blocks and just some plain line marking on the ground to create this basketball space for use of the community. It was something that we had really strongly through the co-design workshop. There were 4 or 5, I think, parents of teenagers in particular who really pushed hard for this. It's something they identified that was really lacking in that sort of area of the LGA. So look, it's great. Gone through and we are able to identify it and really deliver it as part of the project. Some challenges there. Obviously, the major concern that came through was around car parking. But what we identified is we've left that in place both across the summer season of sport and into the winter season of sport, really to find out how much of an issue losing those about 3 or 4 car spots worth of space is. And what we find is that given the nature of the reserve, given it's not a floodlit sports ground, there's really only about 20 or so days a year that the car park that's existing with that reserve was fully utilised, which is the sort of the Saturday mornings for the weekend soccer throughout the winter season. And on those days, the car park's massively oversubscribed. They have 3 or 4 games worth of junior soccer occurring at one time in the field. The parents come with that, you end up with about 80, 90 cars. The car park only has space for about 20. So the surrounding streets are already accommodating a lot of that parking demand. The impact of another 3 or 4 spots being out was really minor. And when you balance it out with, I suppose, the recreation potential and the utilisation that comes to local residents from the basketball court, it was really something they were really supportive of, which was great to see. Next slide, Phoebe. And some stats. Yeah, perfect. So the basketball court, as I said, we left it in place for about 4 or 5 months, from January through to a couple of weeks ago now, early May. So 5 months there. And what we had was a really strong positive response. We're actually really surprised by the volume of community members who really, wanted to promote it and advertise it. We had multiple posts on local Facebook groups and stuff from residents who are, like you can see here, who are providing feedback to council on the local sort of community Facebook group, and sort of advocating and encouraging each other to write in to try and sort of make it a permanent addition. And the results, I think, in the survey speak for themselves. We had 154 people provide their responses. 152 said, yes, we'd love this to be a permanent feature of the park, which is just fantastic. I don't think I've ever had a percentage that high of anything I've proposed in the park before. So that was really great to see. And the other thing that we did try and do with the survey as well is through the survey, we tried to just ask some questions around utilisation and how often people visit the park. And I think one of the things we found was of those 150 odd people that had completed the survey, about 30 or 40 of them who previously said that they either had never visited OH Reed Reserve before or visited it less than once a month. There's about 40 that sat in that category, and about another 30 or 40 that sat in the category, essentially saying that they visited the park maybe once a week, maybe up to once a month. Through this activation, through this basketball court, and obviously they're responding directly based off this, we're able to get it shifted up to a point that 87 people have 87% of people that responded, which that's about 120 or so, were visiting the park either on a weekly basis or a daily basis. So really shifted a lot of that use and a lot of that utilisation of the park, and how frequent people were coming to this reserve, which is really it's end of a dead end street right at the end of our LGA. Really have a real positive shift there and really increase the utilisation, which was a great little stat to see. Obviously, got to take it with a grain of salt because it's very much a captured audience, the basketball court. But just by the fact knowing that we've had 80 or so people who are now visiting the park significantly more often was a wonderful thing. To see that the impact that this basketball court idea could have. And yes, we've now factored it into our planning for delivery next financial year. So fingers crossed that will get approved and we'll be able to deliver that in the next 6 months' time. Next slide, Phoebe. So just touch on, I suppose, the other two ideas that came from that community drop-in session, the workshop. First being park seating, which was really simply we actually used some sandstone logs, which we just placed sort of throughout the park at locations that we identified in conjunction with the workshop participants. So we had an on-site visit and walked around with, I think it was about 3 members of the workshop that arrived on that day, and we walked around and identified some locations. So use those sandstone blocks to sort of create a temporary seating opportunity. And funnily enough, we actually reused those sandstone blocks to create the temporary basketball court. So we really being sustainable in how we did that, and really I think it was a cost saving more so than anything else. But it really just showed that we were reinforcing that nature of lighter, quicker, cheaper, and being sustainable in how we're delivering these activations. And the second one being the wayfinding signage. So really just working with our bush care team to identify a series of wayfinding signage throughout the reserve, and identifying some of those bush tracks that do come off it, and promoting to our community sort of where the walk goes, where it'll end up, how long it is, really providing some information to try and encourage that utilisation. So the wayfinding signage, it's an activation that's ongoing, so we're still collecting feedback on that. But the park seating, 100% positive feedback. We've now installed those sandstone blocks permanently, and I suppose put a variety of sort of there's like flat seat options or with a seat back on top. So I've installed those into the sandstone itself. So place those around the reserve, which really is to the benefit of both just the general park users, very much as a strong dog off leash community at Tree Reserve, who are certainly using those every day, as well as the sporting user groups, so the soccer clubs who are based there for weekend sport. Obviously, the parents, the kids are using those for seating, where previously they were just leaving their bags on the ground and sitting in the grass. So great little thing that we're able to identify through this workshop.
Stephen, sorry to be time master. You have roughly about 5 minutes, so we can have the last 5 minutes to answer questions.
Perfect. I'll run through very quickly. So the last one we've just done just last week was the Rotary Co-Design Workshop. So very different sites. So this one, we had very strong stakeholder engagement groups. So obviously being an athletics field, we've got 2 athletics clubs who are based out there, very, very strong interest in the space and the future of the space. And also based out of that reserve, there are a set of a kayaking club who utilise the reserve because it's right on the Lanco River. They use the facilities in the reserve as a launching point for a lot of their activities on the river itself. From that, as I said, we went through the same process, identified our workshop participants, got a selection of both residents, sports clubs, both athletics and kayakers, some parents, and the final, I suppose, group that we're able to identify through this is we do have some traditional sort of Aboriginal Indigenous art installations within the far end of the reserve, and luckily one of the participants put their hands up was a local who worked in that space as a company who do a lot of sort of cultural education pieces in that space. We're able to engage them and have them come along as participants as well, which was great. The 3 ideas that community come with were a multi-sport day, really trying to use the reserve to its potential from an active recreation standpoint and try and promote athletics and kayaking, but potentially the use of the reserve for other sports. Bushwalk wayfinding signage, really similar to OH Reserve, and actually, conveniently enough, Rotary Reserve, one of the bushwalks that comes off Rotary does connect up to OH Reed, so we'll have a link there, so it'll actually be quite coordinated in how that planning works out, and be able to run some bushwalks later this year, to promote, I suppose, those signage and to promote both the walks either originating from OH Reed or originating from Rotary. And the final was around the Indigenous education programming, which really is something that was identified in Council's Reconciliation Action Plan, and really just a byproduct of having, I suppose, the workshop participant who came from that space. I think it really sort of made the other participants sort of realise that there's value beyond just the active recreation of the reserve, and with it we'll now look at running some different programmings and classes, hopefully in time for NAIDOC Week. But really throughout the year to promote, I suppose, the installations that are there in the reserve, promote that as a use of the space, and try and encourage, I suppose, some more programming in that within that space, both with organised groups such as schools and the clubs, but also just for our broader community, to encourage them to visit this reserve for one of those, especially if they desire to learn and educate themselves around some of those Indigenous history of our LGA. Next slide, Phoebe. What can we do better? So I think as we're working through this process, we've had 3 sort of experiences that we've run through a fair way through the process. One that we've just started, we're in the community engagement sort of workshop ID stage at the moment. What the community does desire for still is a plan. They really want to see a piece of paper at the end of it. They want to see what is the outcome at the end of it. So that's something that we're going to look to develop for the 2 sites we have this year, Rotary and Carlson Park, the other one, which is a small local park in Willoughby. We're still refining the format for the workshops and refining how we manage, I suppose, balance the need between sort of sports clubs and general community. And the Rotary one, we did find there was still quite heavy discussion around that sporting space, even though we tried to get a balance there between sports club and community. So we're still trying to manage that process and refine how we go through the workshop design session on the night. And probably the other key takeaway is the need to continue to educate our community on this activation programming idea versus infrastructure. The community engagement pieces that we are doing, those broad engagement exercises, the community, I suppose, still wants to come and tell us, oh, please build this, please build that, please build a new sports ground, amenities, build a new toilet block, build a basketball court. Where obviously we're trying to encourage them to sort of help us develop ideas which are more based around the activations and programming and using the existing space. Because often, while some of the sites have some small areas you can maybe identify, on the whole, a majority of our parks and reserves are very much full, and without, I suppose, removing a building, removing a court, removing a sports field, we probably can't really fit any sort of new infrastructure in. So we've got an ongoing piece there to sort of educate community about our new approach. Thanks, Phoebe. What's the future? So really, we're obviously continuing to roll this program out with the goal of trying to build from 2 sites per year up to 4 sites per year. We've identified that there's probably about 20 parks or so across our list of 130 odd parks and reserves in total where we can really roll out this approach. It's obviously not something that you're going to work on a small little pocket park. Generally, those parks are to a degree self-sustaining. There's not a whole lot of, I suppose, activations or programming you can often fit into it. So we've got about 20 or so larger parks that we're looking at identifying to run through this process on a sort of a cyclical basis. Although there's always room to throw an extra in, if there's a particular need due to a development or a councillor political reason, or a particular change in how a park may be used, then certainly this is something we can fold in. But the idea is to try and reach about 4 sites per year and go around and sort of on every 5-year cycle try and visit each of those 20 parks, which in essence will align this approach to our delivery program, meaning that sort of each site, each park we're visiting, they're getting a plan for sort of the next 4 years. Year 1 being conduct our workshops, conduct our activations. Years 2 and 3, delivering some of that infrastructure that we hopefully identify. Before year 4, we sort of let it sit and then come back again and sort of ask, what's new, what new activations, what new programming can we maybe fit in this park in future. And then obviously behind all that, we'll obviously carry on with our asset renewals if and when required. Sports field upgrades, drainage, irrigation, replacing of shelters, park seating, all those things. We'll carry that on, but I think it's really given us a model for how we can be a lot more responsive to our community and be a lot more, just have a much greater presence and an ongoing discussion with them, as opposed to maybe coming on, speaking to a community once, and then not really seeing them again for 20 years. So I think I'm really happy with how that shifted our approach and how we can, I suppose, continue to roll this out for the future.
Thank you, Stephen. That was fantastic. It's so great to hear from real life projects and what the learnings are. So that was fantastic. Thank you for sharing. There are a number of questions in the chat about the co-design workshop itself. So
Yep.
I've mishmashed them together for you so you can respond together.
Sure.
Like how big are these co-design participant groups for you? How long does the co-design process really take? And how much of the budget have you allocated to the co-design projects in the 15 to 20K budget allocation? And is the focus of your co-design programming of the space or temporary interventions?
Yeah. Okay, so the co-design workshops, we tend to target about 15 participants. We are adjusting it based on the site. So if it's a smaller site, say a smaller interest level, we have had a group, I think the one we're looking at running Carlson Park shortly, I think we might have a group closer to 8, 9 or 10 at that site, bit of a smaller location. But generally we're having targeting about 15 or so participants. What that allows us to do is either have sort of 2 or 3 tables of 5, 6, 7 participants. Any more than that, we find that people aren't necessarily willing to, or maybe some of the louder voices might drown others out. So we're really targeting about 5 or 6 per table, 2 or 3 tables from a resourcing standpoint. We're able to turn those around quite quickly. So we run our sort of 28-day community engagement process. We identify a date for the workshop about 2 or 3 weeks later. Obviously on the night itself, it's about a 2-hour session. The first, I suppose, 15, 20 minutes is sort of just introductions, getting people to know each other, introducing ourselves, and really trying to build their understanding of the process. The session itself, we then run through over that night, is about an hour and a half worth of, I suppose, developing ideas, discussions amongst the group, which obviously we lead, but very much take a backward step and try and just facilitate that discussion amongst the table, and hopefully get some conflict in a positive way to really help them, I suppose, work through and identify different issues. Once we've sort of run through that night and we've got the 3 ideas that we get those sort of 15 people to come to, we're then allowing ourselves about a month to go away, do a little bit of further investigation. So if there's something that we're maybe not quite sure on, if there's an idea that's a larger event that might need input of, say, council's events team or other staff in council beyond, so it's our immediate team, we'll have a discussion with them before we go back to the group and confirm, yep, here are the 3 ideas. We try and give ourselves about a month for those investigations. Luckily, so far, most of the ideas have worked, but we allow that process anyway. And then we allow 6 months to actually deliver the activations or the temporary infrastructure within a budget of it's about $15,000 or $20,000 per site we're targeting. Ideally, if it's less, great. But my budget allocation that I've set, that ongoing amount for this process is around sort of the $40,000 mark. The idea being that $40,000 is, I suppose, delivering the activations themselves, and then is also being used for the residuals of actually running the workshop sessions. So signings that we do, any of the letterbox dropping, the materials we produce, that sort of promotion. So it's sort of all encompassing about that $40,000. That's delivering 2 at the moment. Hoping to sort of push that budget up to around sort of the $60,000 mark and build us to 4 sites per year, which would be around sort of just under $15,000 per site for those activations. In terms of whether it's infrastructure or programming, really it's a combination of both. It really depends on what the community comes to, and I suppose what our ability as a council is to deliver that. Ideally, we want to try and partner with groups, and if there's one of the ideas that came out of the Rotary workshop didn't end up being one of the top ideas, but it was something that was very much could have been driven by the athletics club as an idea. Ideally, that's a perfect situation for us, because then we're sort of, to a degree, outsourcing some of that resource. We just have to provide a bit of a supporting role. But really, it just depends on what the groups say. We're really happy to explore either option in terms of either temporary infrastructure or that sort of programming activation space. Just depends on what the group wants.
Thanks, Stephen. I know, there are a number of questions coming in which we won't have the time to answer all of them. So maybe I'll throw this last question to you, is how did you manage conflicting priorities in one open space? For example, when there are strong sports users, but there are also strong feedback wanting more leisure activities. Have you separated or reconciled the 2?
Yeah, essentially, I think what we try and really reinforce the groups at the start of the session that we are thinking broader, and we are trying to think about the broader community. So although the groups have come to us and they've advocated for, obviously, very much sort of, I suppose, sport-specific infrastructure, we've really prioritised saying that, look, the need we have and the shift we've got within the strategy is to move away from, I suppose, programmed sport and programmed exercise to broader community recreation. So to a degree, we're dictating that. Obviously, in how we plan and deliver it, we try and minimise the impacts on groups. So, for example, if it's a temporary activation, a Tai Chi class, for example, if that was to come up at a reserve where we had sports field use, Obviously, the timing and the programming of it, we try and do it at a time that wouldn't necessarily conflict with the, I suppose, the booked hired use of clubs. Where it's temporary infrastructure, again, we'll try and avoid impacting that ongoing use. And that's probably part of that criteria, the matrix that we have. We're evaluating those 3 ideas. How it fits in with the existing reserve is one of those criteria. If it's, I suppose, conflicts with an existing use, so if it's saying let's make our rugby field a soccer field, that's likely to receive a red dot, and receive poorly in that matrix that we evaluate with the group. So I think, to a degree, by how we select participants and getting a broad group, we're, I suppose, managing some of those club demands and sort of enforcing that there's a broader view set. But more so, through the process itself, we're really pushing and encouraging the participants, the workshop, to identify and be aware that council's remit for this strategy and for our public spaces is to target broader use, broader needs, and shift beyond the organised sport groups.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephen. And thanks for spending the time, all of you, in coming and listening to our webinar today. Hopefully you found this as interesting as I did. If you want to reach out to either Stephen or I, you can contact us, through, for me, it will be info@credconsulting.com. Stephen would be Willoughby City Council's email address, and we would both be very happy to chat to you about anything else that you have or any other questions that we have. But thank you for joining our webinar today. Phoebe has just popped a little poll, so if you want to take a second to answer that, we'd be grateful. But if not, wishing you all a great rest of the week, and thanks for joining us.